as soon as the establishment, whether it's media, politicians, whatever it might be, stacks up against somebody for something, that's when you should take a breath and really look at it and ask the why. And usually I ask myself, no matter what it is, how does this person, this corporation, this entity want to manipulate me with whatever it is that they're putting out? Because it's social media in particular is a tool, and a tool that can be used to manipulate. And so that's the question I ask. How's this person, what is this person trying to do? What is this corporation trying to do? How are they trying to get me to think? How are they trying to influence my behavior? Back in the day, it would be consumer behavior. We want you to buy something and buy your product rather than the competitors. Different. Now it is about controlling, influencing, manipulating behaviors and thoughts. And even without the AI side of the house, it is a very popular, a very powerful tool when it comes to manipulation. So I always just take a breath and ask myself, how am I being manipulated when I see something? And even if it's against somebody that I don't like, for lack of a better term, and see something pile up against that person, I wonder, oh, why? What are they trying to do? How am I being manipulated here?
What's going on, guys? Ian Scotto here, Battle Line Podcast. Tremendous episode coming up with Navy SEAL Jack Carr. We get into all different types of things. Navy SEAL, best-selling author. He's got a book that's coming out, Only the Dead. I know you're a little jealous. I have the advanced copy right there, but it's going to be out later this month, May 16th, so get the pre-order now. Very excited to have him on. And actually, as a guy I've known since really when he first came out with the first Terminal Series novel, and now I turn on UFC, as I say to him, and he's sitting there cage side and next to Mel Gibson. He's become quite a superstar, but he's still a very humble, down-to-earth guy. Before we get into everything, I got to talk about actually our friend Sean Lake, right? He knows plenty of Navy SEALs. I don't know if he knows Jack necessarily, but how many Navy SEALs use Bubs Naturals? I mean, I see Clint Emerson using Bubs Naturals and so many other guys. Just because of the connection with Sean, that's enough to get you to try the product. But once you're using it regularly and you're using the collagen and MCT oil powder and you see the effects on joints, on workout recovery, you will be sold like so many of our listeners are. So Bubs Naturals, for those of you who don't know about the benefits of collagen, collagen is the most abundant protein in the human body. It is literally the glue that holds our bodies together. Collagen is a blend of highly functional amino acids found in all the body's connective tissue. Now, what makes them great is they're all single source, grass-fed cows that they use, and also just that ground-up cowhide. It's great if you're working through any injuries, and also, as I said, for workout recovery. If you're looking for a product for cleansing, their apple cider vinegar gummies cannot be beat. The MCT oil powder from coconuts, great source of energy. So check out all their products. They also have Bubs Brew now. They've got Hydrate or Die. Everything that they put out there, they really work hard on and put out the best product possible. So check out bubsnaturals.com. Use the promo code BATTLELINE and you're going to get 20% off. I know you've seen them on the shelves at different places, but you'll get the best deal through us when you go to bubsnaturals.com and use the promo code BATTLELINE. And hey, before we hit this interview with Jack Carr, I want to remind you guys, we do have the Etsy store open, the Battle Line Podcast Vault at battlelinepodcast.etsy.com. We've got the limited edition pins up and hopefully more stuff in the future. Still want to sell some more of those, and then actually as I move into this new apartment and have a better looking space than this for those of you watching on YouTube, we'll work on some new products hopefully. But check out battlelinepodcast.etsy.com. You are not going to want to miss this episode. Be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening to hear all of our latest stuff. But with that, let's get right into it.
From Kansas City to New York City, from planet Earth to extraterrestrial life in space, a podcast with no equal. engaged in unconventional warfare through your speakers and headphones. This is a show about embracing the suck, conquering your demons, and finding God in the face of adversity. Chris Tonto Peranto.
Switch is on. Motherfucker, I'm gonna shoot you in the face.
Ian Scotto.
You know, Ian and I have been dating for a long time.
You are now tuned into the Battle Line Podcast.
The Switch is on, Battle Line Podcast, here with a friend of the show, guy that I've actually known for a while now, Navy SEAL, host of the Danger Close podcast, and author, creator of the Terminalist series, and the author of the latest Only the Dead, the final book in the James Reese series, in the Terminalist series, right? Or you're looking at me like it might not.
I don't know where that came through, but we can go with it just to keep people talking.
I'll tell you what made me think of it. You know, it was because on Amazon it said book 6 of 6, and I was just like, is it intentionally meant to be book 6 of 6? So it's going to continue.
That's right. It's they say, like, so you know how many there are. So
sure.
3 books out, it's 3 of 3, or book 1 of 6 or 2 of 6 if it's already out.
Which makes sense. I wasn't sure if you were billing this as like the conclusion of the series, which would be kind of crazy, and the book does not come off in any way as this is the conclusion. So I was kind of confused there, but yeah, before we recorded, you were wondering how long it's been. So we're now at episode 185. You were back on episode 28 when we launched the show 3 years ago for Savage Son. And what I was reflecting on that's so wild is basically I first heard of you through Brad Thor, and he was like, Jack Carr is going to be the next big thing. He did the opposite of what I did. He was a SEAL, and now he writes these books. I get to hang with these SEALs after writing all these books. And then your career just took off. And the last time that you were on, you were talking about, hey, I have this series in the works with Chris Pratt, the Terminalist. And the truth is, so many authors or people from all different backgrounds have projects that just either don't take off the way you expect them to do. But for you, I mean, the truth is, like, I'm sitting watching UFC and you're ringside with all these other, or cage side with all of these other celebrities. And it's just awesome to see how far your career has come in 3 years. It's amazing.
Oh man, thank you so much. Yeah, that ring or cage side seat, Mel Gibson was right there, which was awesome. And I should have asked him for a selfie or whatever, because everybody else was. And now I'm kicking myself because growing up with of course Mad Max and Road Warrior and Lethal Weapon and all that stuff, I'm kicking myself for not getting a photo with him. And also in the show, so I had a little cameo in the Terminalist series, and they wouldn't let me do a little car crash. It looked like just a kind of little fender bender essentially. And I'm glad after I saw it, I was like, oh, okay, because it was actually pretty violent, much more violent than it comes off on screen. So they wouldn't let me do it. So a stuntman came in to do it. And he's a legendary Hollywood stuntman named Nick Rogers. And he doubled Mel Gibson jumping off that building in Lethal Weapon, handcuffed the business guy. So that was kind of cool. So I got to talk to Mel Gibson about that. But yeah, things have been pretty busy since we last talked. And when we last talked, it was before Savage Son had hit the New York Times list. And that was my first book to hit the New York Times list, the third one. And then the first two came on after that. So they've all been New York Times bestsellers now. The last one was #1 across the board. But when I talked to you last, yeah, they hadn't. And I was like, that's when you're growing up and you're reading all these books by David Morrell and Angie Quinnell and J.C. Pollock and Mark Golden and Nelson DeMille. And you're seeing at the top of it says New York Times bestseller or #1 New York Times bestseller. So growing up, that's what, that's what you want. And so after I talked to you, and it was probably because I talked to you, hits the New York Times list.
Let's be honest, Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson, those don't hurt.
Well, those were all interesting all afterward. So with the New York Times list, and then Joe texted and said, hey, do you want to come on down? I said, of course, absolutely. And then Chris posted a video after that as well. And then later that summer, Tucker has me on. So all those things happened after. And it's interesting because in the lead, like, I've known Joe for a while. I've known Chris for a while since he optioned the book. It's been a couple of years since the option first novel. And we have Tucker and I had all these mutual friends who've been trying to put this together for years, even before I had books out, just because they thought we'd get along and wanted to connect us. now, and I was kind of like, why haven't any of these kind of, 3 people with these larger followings had me on? And you can't ask, because then it makes things weird,
Sure.
So you can't ask. But then now I am so glad that none of those guys had me on or said anything until after I hit the New York Times list, because now it just takes off the board. People say, oh, must be nice. The only reason you made the New York Times list is because Rogan had you on, or Chris Pratt said something, you were on Tucker. And I like that is not the case. So now I thank them for not saying anything in the lead up, and then only after it hit the New York Times list, having me on. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, and it's like at the end of the day, who even cares what those people think? You know that you put a lot of quality into your work. You know the fact that, like you said, honestly, in the prologue of the book, like you lived this life. So that's how you're able to write about this. You're not someone who, as you say, who has to have conversations with these kind of guys because you actually have been there and done that. It's kind of the same thing as, I work with Chris Peranto when we talk about stuff, which, by the way, I'm sorry he couldn't be here. He gets these like speaking engagements last minute. And I was wondering, with what you do, I mean, podcast host, author, and a whole array of other things, overseeing a hit show. Do you do any of the public speaking stuff? Because, for him, every now and again, last minute, it'll be like, we need to have you for this speech in Colorado. So.
Yeah, no, I don't do that. I've done it a little bit in the past. I don't enjoy it. I prefer going to an independent bookstore and sitting down and signing books, giving a little bit of a, kind of intro type thing, question, saying thank you to people who get the book or have been with me for a while or took a risk on me as a new author and told a friend. So I much prefer to do that. I do get requests for the speaking stuff, but there's just, one, I don't like it, and 2, it's there's no time for it with all these other things going on. I'm trying to get better, more efficient with my day and time and that sort of things as more projects pile up, and they're all fantastic projects. The James Reese series, and then I have this nonfiction book on the barracks bombing in 1983 coming out fall of 2024. So about a year and a half from now, it's my first step into the nonfiction world, and then all these scripts for the spinoff show, and then for the second season of Terminal List called True Believer, which is based on the second novel, and then all the other things that go along with just posting on socials, saying thank you people on socials, writing a blog, coming up with a plan that on how you're going to launch this next book, or all that sort of thing. The days are pretty busy. And then the podcast.
Yeah.
And thus far, I've read everyone's book who has come on the podcast, some a little quicker than I would like. But I don't know if I'm always going to be able to do that or not, but up to this point I have, and that's a lot more work, as you know, than maybe people just listen every now and again or watch every now and again. It's a lot of work to prepare. You can't have somebody else maybe read it and give you some questions, but that just feels weird to me. And I feel like someone would make a mistake and I'd ask someone a question meant for some other guest, or something would stay in if they copied and pasted. Or so anyway, I've read and come up with all my own questions up to this point, but it is a lot more work than people would think.
Yeah. You don't want to say something stupid like me being like, this is the last book of the series by accident. No, but
I understand that though, because I think that's strange also how they word that. You really have to kind of think about it. It's like, oh, okay, there's 6 of these things, and
it makes sense. No, and I know the same thing with like Brad Thor when he has the final, the latest book out, they're going to do the same thing. So it makes sense. But yeah, I could relate to what you're saying in terms of not liking the public speaking. I've done it once. And for me, I think people assume if you're a radio host or you do with what you do, meeting one-on-one with readers, that, oh, you like being the center of attention. And I really don't. And it's a totally different thing. I think like this is way more of a personal medium, talking one-on-one with someone whose work you respect, or speaking with the readers who enjoy your work. It's so much different to me than being up on a stage and everyone's eyes on you. Like Chris really thrives off that. It's not something I personally enjoy.
No, me neither. And I don't think I'm very good at it, because a lot of times I get up there and they ask me to talk about, or when I've done it in the past, CEO stuff, leadership stuff, that sort of a thing. And, for me, that's not, that's not what I do. And for me, I kind of think like, if you haven't, a lot of it's pretty basic. Do the right thing, establish trust up and down the chain of command, just be a good person, help people along, mentor people along, give people credit, like all that sort of thing. And I'm kind of, when I'm up there talking about this stuff, or when I've done it in the past, in my mind, I'm thinking, if you haven't figured this out yet, me up here is not helping you. Like, you're forced to be in here. Probably it's a company. You got to go in, you got to spend your 2 hours. They have a budget allocated every quarter to bring someone in for leadership development or professional development or whatever it might be. And this time it's you, and okay, you go up there, but it's kind of like and some people are great at it and they really inspire and stuff. But for me, I just feel like it's more like the monkey dance type thing, get on stage. And that's what I feel anyway, but whether that's true or not. And I just don't enjoy it. So yeah, I don't do it.
Yeah, and also you really took an unconventional path, I would say. It is the typical thing for a Navy SEAL or someone in special operations to be that public speaker for consulting companies, or to write a nonfiction memoir about themselves, to go into contracting. I mean, when you said, I want to create this whole new universe based on my experiences, based on guys that I served with, and then have it become this hit show on Amazon, it's a very unique path that you went down.
Yeah, but it was by design from the beginning, whether I recognized it or not early on. I'd had 2 things I wanted to do with my life, and one was serve my country in uniform, specifically as a SEAL. And I found out about SEALs when I was 7. And then as I'm reading everything I can find in the local library on special operations, back then, most of it was on Vietnam. And by most of it, I mean, there wasn't that much in the early 80s, mid 80s.
Dick Marcinko.
Marcinko's he was 90. He was early 90s. So there wasn't anything by him. There was the Delta Force by Charlie Beckwith that was out there. I read that immediately. That came out mid 80s. There was 5 Years to Freedom, Nick Rowe, out there about Vietnam, being a POW in Vietnam, Army Special Forces guy. There's a couple of things here and there. And there was from the back of Soldier of Fortune magazine, there was like videos. I think you can still get them in beta and VHS that kind of showed some SEAL training and then showed some video from Vietnam. And there were some magazine articles here and there and some mentions here and there, but not much. So by the time I was 10, my mom was a librarian. So I grew up surrounded by books, a love of reading. And by the time I was 10, I started to read the things that my parents were reading. That was my transition from reading, I'd say, young adult fiction to start reading the same types of things my parents were. And by 6th grade, when I was 11, for sure, I am reading the same kind of thrillers at the same level that I'm writing and reading today. So I started to build this foundation in the art of storytelling from the masters. And I didn't look at it like that. I was just enjoying these books, and I'm enjoying reading these books with protagonists, with main characters that have backgrounds that I want in real life one day. So back then, even if you didn't read during the 80s and even in the 90s and just watch TV or movies, the typical background of somebody was that they were a Marine sniper in Vietnam, they were Army Special Forces Vietnam, Navy SEALs Vietnam, CIA paramilitary Vietnam, and now they were a cop or a private investigator or a stuntman, on the Fall Guy, whatever it might be. But that gave them the background to be able to do these things believably that they're doing and solving problems and have these skill sets. So I was reading these books by like David Morrell, who created Rambo back in 1972 with First Blood, a book that's never been out of print since its publication. And so I figured, like, oh, David Morrell must have done some research into this, or Nelson DeMille, he must have done some research. And Nelson DeMille was was an Army infantry officer in Vietnam. So I'm reading these books, but I'm reading them to enjoy, but also for a little bit of education. And hey, these guys must have done some research into these characters and backgrounds, into the CIA, into the SEALs, whatever it might be. So I knew that I was going to write those kind of books one day, but I thought of them as 2 distinctly different entities. First serve, then write these thrillers. I didn't realize just how much overlap there was going to be until I sat down and started writing that first one. And after I started doing that, it really became evident that it wasn't just going to be the getting sniper weapon systems and calibers right, and saying magazine correctly and not clip like a lot of others. It became evident that the feelings and emotions behind these things downrange were going to find their way into the pages of this novel. And I was going to have to go out there and interview people who had had these experiences, because I could just think back to what it was like to be ambushed in, let's say, Baghdad 2006. And then I take that and I apply that to my character, and he might be getting ambushed on the streets of Los Angeles, or say in Spain, or wherever it might be. But I can take those feelings and emotions and apply them to a completely fictional narrative. So I think that's what really made it stand out. But it was a different way. Most people would write, would look at the Marcinko kind of a model and say, oh, look, you can write this nonfiction that gets you out there and gets you published. And you've already talked about your life now. What do you do next? Oh, you can have a series of thrillers that come out that now build whatever you're building, your audience. But that was never the way I wanted to go. I always wanted to forge my own path and do it a little differently than anybody else.
You might know this because you guys are friends, and I know that he kind of helped you to get to where you are. But Brad Thor's story growing up is extremely similar to yours when we've had him on. It's the same thing of like reading the same books his parents read and getting into this whole universe and then wanting to become a writer. So I guess there's some similarities there.
Yep, he did, and he said, I think it was on your podcast where he said that he wrote first, but now he can't go back and be a SEAL or something along.
Yeah.
Just because it's natural to do the military thing first, because there are age restrictions. It makes sense to do it when you're younger, and then do then start writing thrillers. But Brad's been amazing to me from day one, and what I really appreciated about him is that he was so forthright and honest with me the first time we talked, in that he kind of did a little interview with me because so many people wanted to talk to him, and now I know how many people tell you that they have a book idea, and so now I get it. But back then, he took the time to have a call with me, and he was interviewing me. And I think if I had asked him questions like, "Oh, can you make money at this?" or essentially, I just told him the same story we just talked about here about growing up and this love of reading and all of this. And the only reason he really took the call was because a friend mutual friend told him some things I did in the SEAL teams, and he took it as a thank you. So that's anyway. So that's why he did it. But what he told me was like, okay, if you write this thing, I can let Simon & Schuster know it's coming. And then he said, I'm not going to help you. Don't send me any chapters. Don't ask me for any advice. But if you finish this thing, which he thought I would not, because most people that tell authors they're going to write a book don't. He's like, I can let them know it's coming. And then I called him back a year later and said it's done. And so he let Simon & Schuster know it was coming. But I appreciated that he did not say, oh yeah, just shoot me a chapter every now and again, or just kind of like offhandedly thinking that I won't, and then I did, and then maybe I would have, and then he's busy writing books, he's doing all his stuff too. So now I really appreciated him saying no, and it also didn't give me a crutch. It didn't give me like I'll send this to Brad, he'll let me know if it's good. It didn't give me I didn't have anyone to send it to. So I really appreciate that now, because now I get those questions, and being so busy, people want to send you chapters and ideas and all this stuff, and like. And I know I don't want to do it for a couple of reasons, because I don't want it to influence my writing. You know what I mean? And the lawyers at Simon & Schuster don't want me to look at anything, because, you don't want someone to have some sort of a weird, like, oh, you stole my idea type of thing. I don't want to deal with that. So I think Nelson DeMille did something. I think he said years ago, he said something like, I'll either read it or I'll blurb it. Which one do you want me to do? And people will be like, oh, I want you to blurb it. And so we just give a blurb, or maybe have an assistant read it and give a blurb or something like that he'd edit. So now I see that now, time is, this is why I appreciate people listening to podcasts, people buying the book, listening to the book, just following on social, making a comment, whatever it is, because that's time they're never going to get back. So that's something I take very seriously, and always is at the forefront of my mind, whether I'm writing a sentence in the book or doing a post on Instagram. I take that extremely seriously because of that trust we talked about earlier. They're never they trusted me with this time, and that's a serious responsibility. So whether it's a blog post, Instagram, Twitter, book, podcast guest and question, whatever it is, as much thought goes into any one of those things as the other.
Absolutely. And you could tell that these people who have become your friends genuinely love your work. Like when I hear Joe Rogan interview you, and when I hear Brad Thor talk about your work, they've become genuine fans. And these are people that I know you're fans of. So it's always like surreal that people whose work you respect are now fans of the stuff that you're putting out there. I'm wondering now, like I said, overseeing a hit show, writing these books now pretty much yearly, a new book every year in the series, and as well as doing a podcast, you're very open about the fact, and you spoke about it when you're on with us, having a special needs son. I mean, how do you balance that work-life balance? I'm sure it's got to be just very hard to do.
Well, I'm exhausted, and you can probably tell by looking at me right now. This is full of coffee. Nice. And I don't want any of my kids. We have 3 kids. The middle one has these severe special needs and needs 24/7 care forever. But I never want them to have like their memory of me be, he was always working type of a thing. So like yesterday, our little guy hurt his back on a trampoline. And so he's been having some issues with his back. And so he called and I was in the middle of something, and he said, Dad, can you pick me up at school? My back's hurting. So I stopped what I was doing, jumped in the truck and drove on out to school to get him. And then we ran some errands together. And, but it definitely adds some time to completion dates. It definitely pushes it definitely pushes deadlines to the right a little bit. And then I write very late at night, which is getting harder, even though it's just a couple years past the last time we talked. Savage Son, I pulled some all-nighters, and it was, it's an all-nighter just like any other all-nighter, and it's tough, whatever, but you just push through and do it. This time it was harder, and it's only a few years later. And just being a little bit older, those all-nighters are getting harder to do. So I need to get more effective and efficient with that time, figuring things out a little bit better. I have a team now that's helping a little more, like multiple agents for different things, blockers to kind of take the first kind of inputs or whatever, filters on that side of things. I have an amazing publicist, David Brown at Simon & Schuster.
He's the man.
Oh, amazing. Been with me from the very beginning. We're dear friends now. And my publisher, Emily Bessler Books, incredible. So we have a great team. Have an assistant now that can help with some of like the kind of the scheduling and some of the busier side of things. It's tough. And especially if you're doing for the podcast, like scheduling guests, like that, Ironclad takes care of that for me, my podcast production team. I don't have to I can just do the intro, and then they can kind of take it and deal with the schedule from there. So all those little things, those little efficiencies really add up. And I want to get much better at that over this next year when I have multiple projects now with multiple shows, with the nonfiction, the fiction, continuing the podcast. We'll film this next one internationally. So I'll be over there on set, not the whole time, but I'll go back and forth a few times. And what's that piece is being shot around. So yeah, and I'm just a sponge on that side of the house because it's so different. And I got so lucky on the script side of the house that David DiGilio, the showrunner, and Chris and Antoine, of course, wanted me involved from the very beginning. So really since December of 2019, I've been involved in this creative process that's more group oriented than say the books, because the books, that is only me. The title is only me, and the title comes to mind because we're working through the title for the spinoff series, and there are a lot of people that have input, and it'll get tested and all that sort of a thing. But for this, I mean, it's just me, and I just send it to Simon & Schuster and say, "What do you think of this one?" And I do that very early in the process so that I'm not worried about it. I'm not wasting bandwidth, worried about a title as I'm typing away. But that was a very long answer to those days, and just juggling kids, family, and doing all these things. You just do the best you can, just like in any other profession, any other industry. Just do the best you can and try to be there and be a better husband, a better father each and every day. Try to make each book better, move the genre forward, even if it's just by a degree with each book. So it's just like anything else, just trying to do the best I can and juggle all these things and still be there for my family. I canceled a lot of things. I guess that's another way to put it. I canceled almost anything that was just me, which was a few hunts. So those all got canceled this fall. This fall, they're going to get canceled as well. Just there's so much on the plate, and I can't come back from, let's say, 2 weeks overseas filming, come back, be here for a day, and then go on a 2-week hunt to Alaska. No, I'll be home with my family.
That's understandable. And when you're talking about how the book is just you, that in itself is unique, because I think any of us on the inside know, anyone who works in media, most books by special operators or even public figures that we've had on the show. And there's nothing wrong with this. They're working with co-writers. A lot of the times they're just orating their story, and they're working with a co-writer or a ghostwriter, and they're the ones really putting in the work to make this a coherent book. For you, as you said, it's all you. Now, this book, Only the Dead, interesting thing is I thought how it starts where I am on the Northeast, like that whole Rhode Island area and Martha's Vineyard and all that. And what it got me wondering was, how far ahead do you think of where James Reese is going to be? Did you know that where this book was going to take place a few books in the past? Are you thinking 2 or 3 books ahead of the game of where you want to take this series?
I am. And the first one I wrote down like 6, 7, 8, 9 different one-page executive summaries, and I wanted to start with Savage Son, the one we talked about a couple of years ago. But that came from reading The Most Dangerous Game back in 6th grade, and I read that. It's a short story novella by Richard Connell, and I knew that one day I'd write a thriller that paid tribute to that short story. So that was one I really wanted to start with. But I knew the characters weren't developed enough yet to explore the theme that I explore in there, which is the dark side of man through the dynamic of hunter and hunted. So I knew that I had to come out of the gate with something that was hard hitting, that was visceral, that was violent, that would get people to, and quite honestly, get a New York publishing house to notice. And so it was very obvious that The Terminal List was that story to introduce these characters. And then at the end of that one, I thought, it would be disingenuous just to pick my character up and then drop him into a new save the world type scenario. And he needs to go on a journey after the traumatic events of the first novel. He needs to learn to live again. He needs to find his next mission in life, find his next purpose. And I kind of thought in the back of my head that my publisher would just cut out the first quarter of that book, because it takes a risk, and it's definitely different than I would say that most other authors have done. And it definitely wasn't the safe move. The safe move would have been to cut that whole journey out and just have him up here where he appears in Africa and Mozambique and just go from there. But I'm so glad that they didn't. And that's what's so cool about having 100% complete creative control over the novel. There's no one who's ever even hinted at Simon and Schuster that, hey, do you mind laying off on this stuff a little bit? Or maybe if you do this, you'd get more of an audience or whatever. And same thing with my agent, no recommendations at all. And I like that, because if something doesn't work, if this book doesn't work, and the first review came out the other day, and it's such a relief, because you never know when you put something out there, you're kind of like, all right, here it is. And first review came out, I think 2 days ago, and it was a great one, a 10 out of 10 from the Real Book Spy. He said some very nice things. And so that's kind of a relief to get that, like, see the first one out there and you're like, oh, great. But I like that my publisher doesn't even hint at where it should go next or things that I should do or change. And same thing with my agent, because if it doesn't work, I can't blame them. I can't say, man, I took their advice and it didn't work. And, so that's all on me. So I like that. There's complete ownership right there and 100% creative control. Scripts, a little different. Scripts, there are a lot of people working on these scripts. Even if for a TV show, if you see something that says, it's episode 5 written by so-and-so, it's really a group type of a thing. That script scene, even its initial, kind of out of the box, over time, it changes because of things that change in episode 1, 2, 3, 4 on day of filming, essentially. And then that has to be kind of morphed in to episode 6, 7, 8. So it's a really dynamic process, and a lot of people are involved, from actors to executive producers to writers, and it's a really interesting process. But I am thinking ahead on all the novels. Some of those that I wrote down in that first slew of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different executive summaries have become future novels. But this one in particular, I got invited to a wedding out in Hannesport, a Kennedy wedding back in, a buddy of mine married into the Kennedy family in the summer.
Oh, wow. That's a crazy story in itself.
Yeah, it was wild. I mean, I was with Ethel Kennedy. I'm like walking her down into the breakfast thing, and we sat together, and I got to talk to her for the longest time. And when I was in that house, it's like you're sitting there and you're looking at a photo, and you're seeing a photo of JFK watch the election results come in. And then it's on a little side table next to like this rocking chair. In my mind, it's a rocking chair. It might be a chair. And then you're looking at the chair, and that's the exact chair that he's sitting in the photo that's right on the table next to it. So you're in place with all this history. So anyway, that's where I started thinking about a part of this book, and that was the summer of 2017. December 2017. So
yeah, and we're about to be in the summer of 2023. The book is out May 16th. So that's crazy, the timeline. Yeah. All right, I hope you're enjoying this interview with Jack Carr. Always a pleasure and an honor speaking with Jack Carr. I know that Tonto is not here. As I say at one point in the episode, Chris is at a speaking engagement, is recording this in Colorado. It was kind of a last minute thing. He did want to hop on with Jack Carr, but hey, hopefully next time, if we do one soon when he's back in New York in June, is you'll hear later on. But before we get into everything, Jack is an avid hunter and shooter, and I was actually telling the people over at Simon & Schuster that Photonis Defense wanted to see if Jack could try out their stuff, and there may be something there in the future. I don't know exactly where that's gone, but it'd be cool if Jack does get a chance to try out Photonis Defense, because they are the best out there. Now you can have the superpower to see in the dark with the Viper Binocular Night Vision System by Photonis Defense, which is the global leader in night vision solutions, providing more high-quality night vision capabilities than anyone. Military, law enforcement, and public safety end users utilize Photonis Defense solutions to give them the edge at night in tactical situations and rescue operations. Hunters, shooters, boaters, and enthusiasts can rely on the Photonis Defense Viper Binocular to become masters of darkness. The The new Viper binocular system carries the same features and benefits as the Photonis Defense Viper monocular, with a ruggedized body, and harnesses the power of the Echo Intensifier tubes, giving you sharper images, reduced halo, and industry-leading ultra-fast auto-gating across the range of dynamic operations. Visit photonisdefense.com for more information, or look for Photonis Defense product options from your night vision dealer. That's PHOTONIS defense.com. This is premium night vision. If you're looking for the best night vision on the market, mil-spec night vision, look no further, photonisdefense.com. Also, where are you going to find the best ammo on the planet? Since I don't have to shoot this in Zoom because it's just me, you can see right there in high resolution. If you put the camera on me there, Rob, they have these tins, man. They are awesome. You can still get those on the site, and I think they still have the signed Battle Line tactical tins that you could check out. So Fort Scott Munitions is a manufacturer of multi-federal patented solid copper and brass CNC spun ammunition. It's designed to tumble upon impact, TUI, their trademark, in soft tissue, leaving devastating wound channels for faster bleed out and quicker incapacitation. This ammunition was originally developed to innovate and improve on the standard of military-grade ammunition design. It was found that not only did the TUI ammunition outperform competitors in the self-defense industry, but it quickly became apparent that it would be a top contender for hunters alike. With the ammunition being CNC spun, the tolerances are some of the tightest on the market, ensuring that you receive the same results with each pull of the trigger. Fort Scott Munitions is available throughout privately owned businesses in all 50 states. You can go to the dealer locator at fsm.com, type in your zip code, you're going to find a dealer by you, or you can just simply go to fsm.com and get the best deal through us when you use the promo code BATTLELINE for 15% off. That's only available to you guys listening right now and watching. Use the promo code BATTLELINE at fsm.com for 15% off. All different types of ammo, a lot of stuff in stock, also great merch, great hoodies and t-shirts and hats. Check it out. Fort Scott Munitions is a proud supporter of Chris Peranto, Battle Line Tactical, and the Battle Line Podcast. Once again, fsm.com, promo code BattleLine. When you shop there, you're not only going to get the best ammo, but you're also supporting the podcast. And this is how we keep the podcast free, putting out great content and having amazing guests like Navy SEAL and author Jack Carr. Let's get right back to it.
So I am thinking, and as I'm writing the other books, I'm still thinking like, where am I going to work this in? When makes sense to work this in? But what's great about it is that downrange, you're making decisions in seconds that are going to affect people to your right and left, their lives. And you're aggressively solving problems, you're capitalizing on momentum, you are looking for gaps in the enemy's defenses, you're adapting as fast as you can, the enemy's doing the same thing to you. And I'm doing the same thing on the written page, but I have more time. And if I get to a place where I get a little bit stuck, or I'm like, I'm not really sure how this is going to work out, I don't need to think about that for the next 3 weeks until I figure it out. I can just continue on. I just put a bunch of X's, whether it's in the outline or in the novel, and I continue forward knowing that I have a year to figure this out, and I will figure it out. So I never get stuck with a writer's block type thing. And when I talk about those executive summaries that I do, that's been my process from the very beginning. And it same with this book and the next one that I'm working on now is I write this one-page executive summary. I have a title, I have a theme usually a sentence. It was a couple words, now it's about a sentence. And I ask myself, is this worth the next year and a half of my life? And if that answer is yes, then I read it one more time and I say, hey, if someone would pick this book up and read something similar in the jacket right here in this part, or if it's a paperback on the back, would they be willing to invest time they're never going to get back in this story? And if the answer to that is probably or yes, then I go all in, and that's the next book.
Do you have any fear of the series getting stale? Because I can tell you, I just saw that movie Air in theaters about the Nike story and the Air Jordan story, which, by the way, I thought was phenomenal. But during the trailers, they were showing, and I wasn't even aware of this coming out, the Fast and the Furious 10, which I believe is coming out now. And you wonder, man, how do you keep going 10 movies? I definitely have not seen all 10 of them. And you wonder, like, are they just pumping these out one after the other because it's a moneymaker? And I'm sure for you, like, it's so important to have that integrity and quality, because for someone, Only the Dead may be the first book they pick up in the series. And if it's not a great book, they're not going to continue in the series again. They're going to say, I wasted time on this. I have no interest in James Reese. I'm going to pick up Brad Thor or Vince Flynn or something. So how do you keep, and I'm wondering, like I said, do you have any fear of the series becoming stale or not having something new to say in every book?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that paralyzes me, but it's something that's back there as something I don't want to have happen. So in that respect, it's a part of the calculus, but not as I'm writing, not as, oh, does this feel stale, or is like, I'm not worried about that as I'm writing. I'm just excited to be writing because I love it. I know I'm as prepared as anyone could possibly be for this, and that's due to my parents just encouraging us to read as kids and making reading a natural part of my life. Just as that wasn't like forced upon me, and me having this genuine love of it. So I know that I'm as prepared as I could possibly be in that respect. Also, now I've studied warfare, obviously, and I have this experience downrange in Iraq and Afghanistan. So all these things, this academic study of warfare, that personal experience downrange in Iraq and Afghanistan, this foundation that's built by reading these masters in the genre, knowing the history of my genre. And a lot of authors don't, for some reason. It's always very telling to me if someone doesn't know the history of their genre. I mean, the history of your profession, no matter what it is extremely important because it's a part of your, or important to me anyway. I should just say it's my personal experience or my personal.
No, I get. I mean, I don't know if you've seen this. Now as a podcast host, I've run into podcast hosts or radio hosts who go, I don't really listen to podcasts. It's like, then how do you know what's a good interview? How do you know what's a good show? Right. And you really don't if you're not a fan of the genre. I mean, musicians we have on, they talk about how they were influenced by everything. So I fully get where you're coming from.
Yeah, exactly. Those influences from Richard Connell, like we talked about with Most Dangerous Game, David Morrell's First Blood, Louis L'Amour's Last of the Breed, Jeffrey Household's Rogue Male, like those 4 books they really move the genre forward, and they're all spaced out by, let's say, 15 years apart, boom, 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 20 in some cases. But they really did move the genre forward. And I've read them all. They're all part of me. I love that I read them when I was younger, and I've revisited them. A lot of these things I've revisited. Some things I don't want to, because I don't want to kind of ruin it. If I enjoyed it back in 1985 through the lens of a kid who hadn't had this life experience, hadn't become a baby, whatever it is.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Some of them I'm tentative around. I don't think I'm going to go back to. I don't know, but I'm glad that I read them back then, because it would be a different reading experience to pick those books up today with a different intent behind reading them. Back then, it was just enjoyment, and it was such a magical reading experience, reading all those things growing up. Now today, if you're, let's say, 40 years old, 45 years old, whatever you are, and you pick up one of these things with the intent of studying it, or the intent of like, I'm going to see if could I do this? It seems kind of interesting. That's a different reading experience than reading it at age 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, or 20. Back then, when you're just reading it because it's another form of entertainment and education. And today there's so many more distractions as well. But I just love that I got to read those things growing up. And then I got introduced to Joseph Campbell back in 1988 with a series of interviews he did with Bill Moyers called The Power of Myth. And my mom and I sat down and watched that. And I was, of course, enthralled with the fact that he inspired George Lucas's Star Wars. And I read Hero with a Thousand Faces. And then I got The Power of Myth, which were based on those interviews with Bill Moyers. And I think I didn't mean to, but I think because I was introduced to the hero's journey and to Joseph Campbell so early, I think that the books that I read from then on, the movies that I watched, the TV shows that I watched, I filtered through that hero's journey. And even if whether I meant to or not, if something didn't work or I didn't like something, I wondered if it was because it deviated from this hero's journey. And for those listening, there is a mythology that surrounds a hero that disassociated cultures that had never had any contact with each other. They have very similar mythologies, very similar hero's journeys in their mythology that they pass down generation to generation. And so I think it's something that was just in us innately from our time around the campfire, passing around along stories of the hunt and of warfare in order to educate that next generation, passing on those lessons learned in blood so you could continue on as a tribe or society or family. And so realizing that early on at such a young age, I think really did help form that foundation as well. So it's bottom line, it's all due to books and a love of
Yeah.
reading.
Yeah, and what you're saying about having that all as a part of your origin story, I've definitely used the quote before in the podcast, but I always think of that Bruce Lee quote of absorb what is useful, discard what is not, add what is uniquely your own. And there's probably just certain parts of these books where it's embedded in your mind, and you've been able to add it to your craft and add it to your toolbook of what you do as an
Yeah.
author.
Oh yeah, I love that. I have two copies of the Tao of Jeet Kune Do right over here. I have like the collector's edition, and then I have I got a paperback edition. I got it back in the late '80s or something. But yeah, that's a fantastic quote. And I've thought about that since I read it back. Geez, how many years ago? 30 years ago.
Nice. I mean, so that's a cool thing we've learned from this podcast. I didn't know that Jack Carr was a Bruce Lee fan.
Oh yeah. I mean, I found, so first, you see the movies or any martial art movies really, and then you want to be a SEAL one day. So you figure that I should probably learn how to fight, and you go down and you start doing some Taekwondo stuff, and you're like, okay, this is interesting. It kind of, parallels some of the things that I see in movies, but then you watch like Mike Tyson step in the ring and you're like, oh, what if you get hit in the face by Mike Tyson? It's not gonna end well. You better be fat. You better be quick. You better be out of there. You better get on your getaway sticks and learn how to sprint and run and never get caught. But then that kind of morphed into boxing. That morphed into Jeet Kune Do, and I found out about that. And back then, you had to really go. You had to go to Chinatown. You had to go somewhere to really like go into those martial art bookstores or martial art like they would sell nunchucks and throwing stars.
This was long before MMA was a craze. Yeah,
exactly. This is mid 80s, late 80s. And then you go in there and you see the Tao of Jeet Kune Do. Oh, what is Jeet Kune Do? Interesting, and then you start reading this, and then there's no internet to go to, very few books. There's articles, Black Belt Magazine or whatever else there was. Kung Fu Magazine, I think, was one back then as well. So you just pick up things wherever you possibly can, and you're a sponge. But yeah, then I got into Jeet Kune Do, tracked somebody down and started learning that. They were bringing in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the early 1990s, before MMA, before UFC, before anybody really heard of it. But
the Gracies.
They're bringing it in because you want to take what's useful, discard what's useless. I mean, they had parts of European fencing in there, obviously wrestling, obviously Thai boxing, regular boxing, like all these things, but they're taking what's useful, discarding what's useless, making it uniquely their own. And that's essentially what UFC ended up doing, and mixed martial arts ended up doing a few years.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense why you're a fan now, beyond just being a guy who gets to call Joe Rogan a friend. You know what I'm wondering is, with Chris Pratt being a part of the Terminalist, has he become a friend? Has he become a guy that you get to hang out with?
Yeah, he's been fantastic. So the way that happened is that a buddy of mine called me out of the buddy of mine. He's a great friend now, but I hadn't talked to him in 5 years when he called me. And he calls me in November of 2017, so a few months before the first book comes out. First book came out in March of 2018, and first he calls me, and he's a buddy from the SEAL teams, and he says, "Do you remember me?" And I said, "Of course, Jared, I remember you. How's it going?" And he says, "Well, do you remember what you did for me?" And I did not. And he said, "Well, you're the only person, as I was getting out of the military, that asked me to sit down in your office, talk to me about transitioning to the private sector. You introduced me to people in the private sector, and you followed up with me, and no one else did that. And I always wanted to say thank you." And I was like, "No problem. How's everything going? How'd it turn out?" And he's like, "It's going great, but I heard you have a book coming out." And I was like, "Yep, I got this Terminalist book coming out. I have a galley copy." And I learned what a galley was like 2 weeks before, maybe, which is a rough draft for those listening, essentially, that goes out to reviewers ahead of time. And I said, "I have this thing. I can send it to you if you'd like." And he said, "Yeah, I'd like that, but I'd also like to send it to a friend of mine." And I said, "Yeah, no problem. I'll send two. Who's that?" And he said, "Chris Pratt." And I was like, "Oh, interesting."
I'll keep this in the back of my mind.
First one, I was thinking of Chris Pratt playing this role, and I was thinking of Antoine Fuqua directing. And I thought of Chris Pratt because I wanted someone, and this is just kid growing up in the 80s. Now I'm writing a book that I always wanted to write, and it just makes sense to choose your star. This is in the bedroom off our office off our bedroom in Coronado, California, during my last year in the SEAL teams. And so of course I'm going to choose who's going to star in this, and I chose Chris Pratt. And that's because he hadn't done something like this yet. He hadn't done Guardians of the Galaxy, he hadn't done Jurassic World yet. He's not an A-lister yet, and he's Andy Dwyer on Parks and Rec, so he's likable, he's funny, he's overweight. And then I saw this transition to this character in Zero Dark 30, where he plays a SEAL in a very small role. And I thought, look at this transition from Andy Dwyer to to this SEAL operator. And this guy seems inherently likable on and off screen. Chris Pratt will play James Reese as I'm typing away. And then I'm like, well, I better choose the director. Antoine. Yep. Antoine. I love everything that he's done. He seems awesome. That's who'll direct. And that's who's directing. We're all partners on it now, and we're all executive producers, and that's how it ended up happening. But yeah, Chris called. So he read it. So Jared read it first just to make sure it wasn't garbage. Then he gave it to Chris in December. Chris read it the last week in December of 2017 and called the first week in January of 2018 to option it. And then he came out here that summer, and we went to the back country for about 5 days together and spent some time together. And yeah, he's just fantastic. Just such a great guy. And on set, he really set the tone. Him and Antoine's like the commanding officer for those in the military is how I looked at it. And Chris was like the commander, down to the tactical level leader, Antoine strategic level leader. And they set the tone for this entire set. And so many people came up to me on set who didn't have to and said, hey, I've been part of hundreds of these things, and on no set have I ever felt the way I'm feeling on this one. And that's because of those two guys up there at the top, and David DiGilio, the showrunner, who's there every day, encouraging, mentoring, making it just a positive experience. So everybody wants to be there and bring their A game, and they're all at the top, the pinnacle. When you have a show like this that has a budget like this from a studio like Amazon Studios, you get the A game got people. And so many of them made the point of saying that they've never felt this way on a set. And that's all due to Chris and Antoine and David DiGilio.
Wow. When I hear that story, I wonder, do you believe in the whole idea of manifesting an idea, or it's just like putting that energy out into the world because you really made your dream come true, not just as an author, but being able to basically customize what you created for a television show, television series, or Amazon series, however you want to put it?
Yeah, I mean, there's more than just the manifestation of an idea. It's that work, obviously, because without the work, you're definitely not going to get anything done. And even if you put in the work, though, that's the point. Even if you put in the work, you might not. But for sure, without putting in the work, you're not going to get where you want to go or accomplish what you want to accomplish or create what you want to create. But as far as manifesting it, I think it all comes back to just, this is something I talk to my kids about, is never miss an opportunity to make somebody's day. I never thought of it in those terms until I started really sitting down and people started asking me about this. And if I hadn't taken the time to find Jared, ask him to come to my office, hey, I heard you're getting out. You have a great reputation in the teams. You're an awesome guy. How can I help? So if I hadn't taken the time that, if I was just like too busy, or if that wasn't my thing, or if I was one of those military people who's like, oh, this person's getting out, they go in this other pile, which is more common than one would think. And I never did that throughout my entire time in the military. If you were a good guy and you were staying in, I'm going to help you as much as I possibly can. If you're a good guy and you're getting out, I'm going to help you as much as I possibly can. But it all comes back to making Jared's day that day. And it's something he didn't and then it circled back around all those years later. And when I was choosing Antoine and I was choosing Chris to star, I had no idea that I had connections to either of them. And then I ended up a connection to Antoine as well. A buddy gave an early copy to him a little after Chris got, around the same time Chris read it, but Chris had it for a week maybe before, but around the same time. Point being is somebody gave a copy to Antoine, and then he wanted it as well. And he called just right after Chris. We got connected, and then they talked and worked it out and figured out how to partner together on it, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, you just never know in this journey who you're going to meet and who's going to have connections to who. So it's true. Just treat everybody with respect and dignity, and also just the way you want to be treated, all those old cliches, but it really is true, because they may be able to hook you up in the future. And also just being a good person is valuable.
Yeah, it wasn't Machiavellian at all. I never like, if I have this guy into my office, if I help these guys out, maybe one day.
You weren't thinking that, because I mean, I know the stereotype is every Navy SEAL becomes like a famous author, but like in reality, it's what, like probably 1% or less than 1% of those guys. Probably 99% you've never heard of.
Yeah. Oh, that's exactly right. And most don't take the route that I took. And that's, and people ask me about the nonfiction side. I don't know if I'm going to write something, about my background, but people did so much more than I could ever have hoped to have done in the military.
I don't know. I mean, if I remember correctly, 20-year career as a SEAL.
It was a good run. It was a good run there for a while.
I mean, combat veteran of multiple deployments. I think you've done a hell of a lot.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. But so many people have done so much more. That's not the route I'm taking in the nonfiction space either. My nonfiction space entry is, like I said, the historical side of different terrorist events. So that's 1983 Beirut Barracks bombing. We're the first in a series that explores those. And I'm writing those with an amazing guy, James Scott. He's an historian and a Pulitzer Prize finalist. He hasn't done something like this with anyone else before. He has 5 books out. They're all fantastic. Most of them are on World War II, and such an amazing guy. So I was trying to figure out, like, hey, I'm gonna write these stories. And I got the idea essentially from Tom Clancy growing up. Through the 80s, he just had his thrillers. And then in the early 90s, he starts writing nonfiction with someone who's a subject matter expert in whatever he's writing about, whether it's aircraft carrier, tank, like air wing. He had a bunch of different nonfiction that came out in the starting in the 90s anyway. So I knew I was always going to step into that space, and it had to be unique and appropriate, thoughtful, respectful, and authentic to me, which is the terrorism side of the house. And just growing up during a time where seeing the 1983 Beirut Barracks bombing on Newsweek and Time on our dining room table, seeing the 1979 Iranian hostage crisis, remembering Walter Cronkite counting the days that American citizens had been detained in Iran, they're held hostage in Iran, remembering Desert One when that happened. Moving on to TWA 847, also on the covers of Time and Newsweek, Achille Laurel, TWA, or Pan Am 103. So all these things were very impactful to me growing up, and now I want to go back and really explore them in a thoughtful, respectful way. And in this case, 1983 Beirut Barracks bombing. There's newly declassified information that's out there now that can be explored. These families who have never opened the attics in their homes, that have boxes with photos and letters from their child who didn't make it home from that, are opening those attics up and those boxes up to us.
That's incredible.
Yeah, there's still people who survived and who dug their friends out of the rubble, and it's an incredible story, and there hasn't been essentially the seminal work written on it yet. So yeah, we're working on that right now. So that's more me as far as writing something in the nonfiction space, rather than here's my time in uniform as a SEAL type of a book.
Which is I can't believe you're putting even more on your plate, but it's also fair to say, and you talk about it in these books, like in Only the Dead, in the James Reese series, there's plenty of nonfiction in these books. It's just that the names and the places and all that have changed, but there definitely is some historical stuff that you've lived in these books, just written from the perspective of someone else. Getting back to Chris Pratt, what I was curious about, especially with you being a father and all that, did you see the new Super Mario Brothers movie? I thought he did an incredible job.
Oh, no, he was super excited about it. And then my little guy went this last weekend with his friends twice, but he's at the age, so he's 12 now, and he's at the age where he wants to go with his friends, not mom and dad. So I haven't seen it yet. With everything going on, I have not seen it yet, but my little guy loved it. And I know Chris was super fired up to do that part.
I went to go see it with Adam, who I work with here on Long Island, and him and his whole family and me and his friends all dressed up as Mario Brothers characters. People were taking pictures with us in the theater. We saw it the night that it came out. And I will say there's plenty of stuff just as an adult you'll enjoy in the movie. I mean, without ruining anything, the soundtrack, they went very throwback. I mean, there's AC/DC in the music in the movie, and there's the Beastie Boys and a ton of stuff like that. So there's definitely a nod to the fact that there's parents and grown adults seeing this movie. It was not like, I went to go see Sonic the Hedgehog and I was like, what am I doing here? This is purely a kid's movie. The Mario Brothers movie is not like that. And the thing that they've been saying in the media, and it's very true, there was no selling of any agenda in this movie. There was nothing that you saw where they were saying, let's try to push some type of PC culture, which you see far too often in anything that's supposed to be marketed to kids. None of that was in this. So I couldn't recommend that movie more highly.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now I got to go see it. And I love when they do that, when they put things in for the parents, like the AC/DC soundtrack or Beastie Boys. So I love when shows do that. And you notice it when we watch things with our 12-year-old in particular, when they take the time out to do things like that for the parents, which is greatly appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm still a fan of like the original Ninja Turtles movie. I love that stuff. So I think those movies, they're great for anyone of any age and also for kids. Last question I wanted to ask you, because I know you got other things to get to, but we were speaking about how Tucker Carlson is one of those guys who helped your career, had you on the show. And I mean, you can't escape the news right now with Tucker Carlson. It's just like the biggest thing going on right now. I was just wondering your take on it, because I think this guy, no matter what people's opinions are on him, he had an absolutely historic run. He definitely challenged the system at large. He was the first guy in a primetime show who would challenge things going on with the FBI or the CIA. No one was doing that prior to him. What's your feelings on the fact that I'm sure he's going to do something that's going to be major, but he'll no longer be on Fox News in prime time. And I think it's going to greatly affect Fox News at large.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how that plays out. And yeah, I don't know. I did text him right after just to say, hey, just heard the news and that sort of thing. But I'm very curious to see what happens. It's if you're not thinking about it, not in that world, I think you're surprised. So I'm not in that world. So I was surprised by it. But then when you take a breath and think about it and look at Fox in general, and if you really put some thought into it, then maybe it's not that surprise of a move, and maybe it's a surprise that it didn't happen earlier, because you are standing up against the status quo. You're standing up against Washington establishment. You're standing up against that ecosystem, for lack of a better term, with all those lobbyists, all that money, all that power, and you are challenging it. And you have the most coveted slot on cable news and the largest audience, and you are standing up and challenging these people who are not used to being challenged. And if they are, it's by someone who can't make as much of an impact as Tucker. So I'm very curious to see where he goes and what he does next. And he's a incredibly intelligent guy, and such a nice person. Also, if you know him personally, he's just a great guy.
Yeah, and I heard it said, it was like Bill O'Reilly on Twitter was like, oh, I think he's going to go on to do a Joe Rogan-esque podcast. But like, there's only one Joe Rogan. I don't think anybody's going to be able to do the same thing that he does. And I think Tucker created something very original that was unlike anything else on TV. But I'm just wondering what it is next. And I mean, when you just look at the ratings that he has, once again, people of all backgrounds listening to this show, you may be a fan, you may not. But with the ratings that he got, I mean, he could do whatever he wants at this point. And I think Fox News needed him more than he will ever need Fox News.
Yep, I think that is a very valid assessment, and we'll see. I mean, yeah, I'm excited to see what he does next, whatever it is. I know he's going to be very thoughtful about it and take his time with it. And or I should say, I know. I suspect.
Yeah, I mean, it's but he's not going to fall off the map. We know that's not going to happen. He's got something up his sleeve.
Maybe. I mean, we'll see. It's it's interesting once you have that, and it can be in anything, that financial freedom. And we talked about it with Joe Rogan. You have that financial. It's very freeing.
You have to be less politically correct. You have that "fuck you" money, as they say.
Yeah, exactly. But and that's gonna be different for everybody. So it's really about that freedom. Back in the day, freedom used to be, I don't know, X number of acres, and depending on, just like financial freedom today varies depending on your personal situation. But that used to be land. It used to be cattle, whatever it was, whatever that it was for you back then. It's different today in that. That financial freedom essentially has trumped the other ones, because the other ones are under such attack constantly from within, not necessarily from without, by parties, institutions, people who you would think would understand their history and realize why we have this First Amendment and how powerful that makes us as a country. While at the same time, they're doing all these other things that enrich them, help them. And when I think of that, I think of it in terms of politics and lobbyists, and now tech companies, and everything else up there with the defense industry and pharmaceutical industry and all these people and entities and corporations that can pump so much money into a gigantic bureaucracy who does not benefit from the citizens being free and having a First Amendment, and in particular a Second Amendment, but having they disdain this thing, these freedoms, and do what whatever they can to curtail them. So it's a very interesting time to be alive. But going back to what led me down that tangent was the ability of financial freedom today to really just allow you to experience some of those freedoms that are being taken away from people that don't have financial freedom. So
yeah, there's so many people who want to say something, whether it's in the public space, in actual person, or if they want to say it on Twitter or Instagram. But a lot of intelligent people in the back of their mind, myself included at times in my life, say, if I put this out there, I could lose my job, I could lose my livelihood. And like, that's hanging above anyone's head, especially if they're working for a major corporation. And like, those guys don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's why I liked in the pages of these books, weave in all those things. And, like I said, no one at Simon & Schuster has ever even hinted that I need to lay off any of that. So, in a lot of ways, I think Twitter and social media is tough because it becomes that echo chamber. And how many people whose minds are you changing? What kind of a debate are you going to have in 1 sentence increments back and forth, where someone's already made up their mind to hate you or to hate whatever it is because they saw a tweet from somebody with a lot of followers that essentially programmed them on how to think of something without doing putting the requisite time, energy, and effort into the issue at hand, studying the issue before making a decision about it. So when you're dealing with that kind of a mindset and a person on Twitter, I don't know how many minds you're going to change by jumping into a back and forth, but that's why I weave things into the novels.
Yeah, and that's why when I do see your Twitter, you're just out there promoting what you're working on. You're not one of these guys, of which there are many Navy SEALs, who get into the weeds on every little political topic. And I see that you don't do that. I'm sure it's calculated. I'm sure it's by design. There's a reason not to do that because, yeah, you have better things and more important things going on. And that's why you're a success. And one last thing, actually, here, when you were saying how Tucker is a really nice guy, that's another interesting thing is, your own experience with Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan being friends of yours. And if you do listen to the mainstream media out there or the corporate press out there, you would think these two guys are monsters.
It's crazy. And it just goes to show the power as soon as the establishment, whether it's media, politicians, whatever it might be, stacks up against somebody for something, that's when you should take a breath and really, really look at it and ask the why. And usually I ask myself, no matter what it is, how does this person, this corporation, this entity want to manipulate me with whatever it is that they're putting out, because it's social media in particular is a tool, and a tool that can be used to manipulate. And so that's the question I ask. How's this person, what is this person trying to do? What is this corporation trying to do? How are they trying to get me to think? How are they trying to influence my behavior? Back in the day, it would be consumer behavior. We want you to buy something and buy your product rather than the competitors. Different. Now it is about controlling, influencing, manipulating behaviors and thoughts. And even without the AI side of the house, it is a very powerful tool when it comes to manipulation. So I always just take a breath and ask myself, how am I trying being manipulated when I see something? And even if it's against somebody that I don't like, for lack of a better term, and see something pile up against that person, I wonder, why? What are they trying to do? How am I being manipulated here? And it's just, I found that to give me a little bit more peace of mind and let me take a breath and really study things more in depth before jump into a conclusion. But really, history, I think, is that foundation that would make us a much more powerful country if we had this common ground as far as respecting those who came before to give us these options and opportunities we have today, understanding what was sacrificed so that we do have these options and opportunities and freedoms today, and then maybe realize that, hey, the decisions we make today aren't for us, they're for the next generation. And maybe I should put a little more thought into this vote or this retweet because it's going to have an impact on the next generation of my kids and grandkids. So it deserves a little more time. So stop tweeting and start reading. I think I said that on top one time. So
Yeah, no, I love that. And once again, pick up Only the Dead. It's going to be out in a few days when you guys are hearing this. So May 16th, but the pre-orders matter. We do want to see Jack Carr back on that New York Times bestseller list. And if I could offer my own suggestion, you're talking about how connected we are to everything and the amount of distractions. Put your phone down, put it away, go somewhere quiet where you could read this and really absorb it. I think that's what's most important, to get away from those distractions and to really enjoy yourself and escape in a character like this, in a book like this. Once again, it's officialjackcarr.com, at Jack Carr USA on Twitter, also on Instagram. This has been an honor as always. And I think David said you're going to be in New York City in June, right?
That's right. I come in on, I think, the 3rd for Thriller Fest, which is like a author, thriller, fan conference. And that's on the 3rd, I think. And then I think there's something in New Jersey, maybe on Sunday or Monday. I think it's on my website at officialjackcarr.com. It'll be the last thing on the book tour drop down there. But yeah, I think it's in New Jersey, I think, on that Sunday or Monday. But anyway, it's on the website.
Yeah, I mean, if we could do an in studio in June, that'd
nice.
be excellent. I mean, Chris will be on but via Zoom because it's so hard to get him out of Kansas. He loves it there, and unless he's being paid to do some speaking engagement, it's hard to get him to leave. But I'd love to do an in studio. But this was awesome. I really appreciate it.
Oh man, no, thank you. It's always great to talk to you. And it did seem like I just talked to you yesterday. And I think part of that is I do see you, I follow you and see you on the social channels. So in my head, it's like we've talked a lot more frequently than we have. But thank you so much for having me on. It's always an honor to talk to you, and I sincerely appreciate it.
That's all for this episode of Battle Line Podcast. But we're always posting new content on social media. Follow us on Instagram at Battle Line Podcast, and on Twitter at BattleLinePod. That's an order. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes up every Tuesday. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast platform of choice. Believe in yourself. Face all challenges head on. And as always, never quit.